The neoconservatives wanted to make a case for war, and they did. And the grief of the American people was manipulated so that you would back your president in this evil misadventure. And now everything that I warned him that would come to pass is now coming to pass. The coalition is falling apart. Every day American soldiers are dying. Dying for what? No weapons of mass destruction, no tie or link to terrorism. And once the American people understand the agenda of the neoconservatives, you would be foolish to send your children to die for that which is against the best interest of America, but in the best interest of Israel. All of the agenda of the neoconservatives was to bring President Bush in line with Israel and use the power of the American military to destroy the real and perceived enemies of Israel. Iraq never threatened America, could not threaten America, but as long as Saddam Hussein was alive, in their minds he was a threat to Israel. Syria is a threat to Israel. Iran is a threat to Israel. Anyone that does not believe in their justification of the state of Israel on Palestinian lands is an enemy that must be destroyed. Do you want your children to die for this?
And Biden was instrumental in helping to drive the push for it. And let's play some clips of him in his role at that time.
And this was much more responsibility. He bears much more responsibility than many other senators who simply voted for it. Of course, the statement about chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons were false. And many experts already concluded this at the time of the Senate hearings, but Biden didn't allow these experts to testify. That's really significant. As chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, Biden was able to control the Senate debate on the war, and therefore much of the information that most senators received and that major media outlets reported was really distorted.
So the fact that he would take such a stridently pro-war position, that he would use that role to limit the debate the way he did, played a major factor in getting enough defections from the Democratic majority to join with almost unanimous Republican support to make the war resolution pass. As a result, I don't think it would be unfair to say that Biden played a more important role than probably anybody in Congress in making the Iraq War possible. The idea that Iraq, which had been rid of its non-conventional weapons and weapons programs and weapon systems, that was under the strictest sanctions of any nation has ever experienced, was somehow a threat to the United States and the far side of the world is totally absurd. I mean, totally ridiculous. I mean, the fact that an educated person like Joe Biden with foreign policy experience would believe that it really defies the imagination.
But the witnesses mostly reinforced the pro-war arguments.
The question before us really is, should the United States depose Saddam Hussein? And my answer is clearly yes.
My suggestion, as I stated earlier, is that regime change, as the stated U.S. policy, would be the correct way to deal with this problem.
In my opinion, weapons inspections are not the answer to the real problem, which is the regime.
And the people want a regime change. Let's help them to make this change and liberate Iraq from this oppressor.
Iraq has enough to generate the needed bomb-grade uranium for 3 nuclear weapons by 2005. It is too difficult to see how any measure short of a regime change will be effective.
A nuclear-armed Saddam sometime in this decade is a risk we cannot choose to ignore.
It is essential to recognize that the claim made by Saddam's representatives that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction is false.
We know that Iraq permits known al-Qaeda members to live and move freely about in Iraq. but I am told that is the case, that the al-Qaeda groups are welcome and that they're being supported. Their families are being supported.
I have to tell you, Iraqis desperately want to be freed of Saddam Hussein, and they also know that the only country that can help them with this is the United States. And they are ready to welcome the U.S. as liberators.
Senator Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island pushed back against the witnesses being stacked, but Biden cut him off.
And I do think that it would have been good to have that perspective on this panel, for a better balance. I think we've got from this panel a perspective that the threat is very real, very immediate, and I maybe would ask you to comment on some of these senior military officials, including, according to the article, members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and their
Senator
view.
Yield, just for a moment, I apologize, but
excuse me.
The senator from Florida is going to chair the hearing. I have to leave for a few minutes, and after this panel is over, we'll recess for how much time for lunch? 45 minutes for lunch when this panel, I'm not suggesting we finish now. When the panel is finished, we'll recess for 45 minutes. And I assure you, Senator, there are other witnesses coming along who think the policy of containment is just fine. So I hope you'll find this is extremely balanced when we finish the whole 2 days of hearings. But I thank you for letting me interrupt and turning the gavel over.
Biden never returned to the problem that Senator Chafee raised about the bias of the witnesses that were allowed to testify.